Hi there, Will here, and today I'd like to talk to you about something that a few people have asked me to talk about that I reckon you might find quite interesting. The other day, a fellow by the name of Thomas Parker messaged me and asked me if I could maybe go into more detail sometime in a video about the things I'm talking about when I say base cast, or how I address the idea of negatives and the manner in which a photographic negative impacts the resulting image. And I suppose that's what this video is going to be today. Please don't come here with any aggressive comments calling me an idiot. This video isn't meant to be a scientific interpretation of varying emulsions and acetates and dyes and all the other things that go into film. It's a video explaining my personal opinion and personal interpretations of negatives and the manner in which that a negative can impact a resulting image or print. This is my archive, by the way. There is a decent amount of film in here. That's this year. This is last year. And the years preceding. Maybe I'll talk to you about them some other time, but I've shot a lot of film. And these are my thoughts on how I interpret everything. For a very brief technical overview of how film works, just to give us a bit of a basis here for the things I'm going to get into. This is a roll of unexposed film, unfortunately. Anyway, the way you end up with a picture on film is this acetate base has layers of silver halide crystals on it. Those crystals are sensitive to light. When you expose this film to light, those crystals will respond to it, and then in the development process you remove all the crystals that have not responded to light, and you're left with a negative impression of the light that fell on the image, or on the film rather, when you made the picture. To put it simply, I'm not going to get too deep into any of that stuff, but if you like this format and you like people talking about film, for a top-down view on a light table, you can check out the Attic Darkroom channel. They do really interesting videos in this exact format, and Lena Bessanova gets really into the technicalities of certain film stocks, so if you're into that sort of thing, I would recommend checking them out if you haven't seen them. And I suppose I'll talk about what I'm here to talk about, which is reading a negative and understanding what it's saying to you. So going off the idea that these negatives are an impression left by light in silver halide crystals, and in the case of color negative film, they're interpreted through layers, different dye layers. You can see this is light and that's dark. Where it's dark, you're seeing mainly the acetate backing of the film because none of the crystals have developed. What that means is that in scanning and in printing this, the clear acetate would essentially be pure black. Now, in printing, all you're really doing is shining a light through this negative onto light-sensitive paper. So, if the light is shining straight through something clear, it'll render pure black. If it's shining through the crystals, it'll render the details that those crystals have managed to capture. That's why, in printing, if you've got a poor negative, such as this one, where mainly the acetate is showing through and it's sort of pure clear, then all it's really going to show is the black that is. And that can be quite tricky to reverse in your head, so I'm going to bring some slides in here briefly to show you that idea. You can see in the rebate it's pure black in a slide, and in color negative film that clearness is also pure black when it's been inverted. So if that's pure black, then that is pure black. In scanning, it can be switched around a bit because you can make up data for this pure black, so you can make it like washed out and murky and brown, but essentially any of this clearness in a negative is data that isn't there, which is why when you're looking at your negatives, you want to look for frames like this, where border to border across the area that the image is thrown through the camera, you can see detail. That's also why overexposure is recommended over underexposure, because if you overexpose an image, the crystals will be very clear and pronounced, and they're still there essentially. The crystals will have responded to light, so you can get something out of it. Whereas if you underexpose, you'll be able to get something out of it, especially in a scan. You do get a bunch of latitude, but the data just isn't there, so you're essentially making it up. if that makes sense. To talk about the base casts that I've referred to in the past and why I prefer certain film stocks, this is a roll of Fuji. This is a roll of Portra. And this is a roll of Ektar that I'm not sure is on camera. Okay, some of it's on camera. If you look at the acetate or the backing or the rebate, I don't know what to refer to it as. We'll call it the rebate because I call it rebate. But what it is the clear backing of these film stocks. You'll see there are slight variations in the colors that they have. In the Fuji, it's sort of redder. In the Portra, it's a bit oranger, I guess. And in the Ektar, it's sort of a mix between the two. And what happens when you invert color negative film, which I'll show you here, is that the base shows up as the inverted color of what we see here. And that can have an impact on the way the colors are rendered. That's not the main reason that color film stocks have the color that they have. That of course has to do with a whole bunch of scientific stuff that I can't get into because I'm not really intimately familiar with it. But essentially, in color negative film, there are 3 dye layers, and those dye layers respond differently to light, and they interpret the dyes. They interpret the colors through dyes and dye removal process and that sort of thing. But when I scan this on my Imicon, these are the observations that I've come up with, which is that Fuji is kind of a nightmare, Portra has a cyan base cast, and Ektar is really great. I'd assume that it's because it's got a pretty neutral acetate backing or rebate area. And I'll guide you quickly through this Fuji roll to show you how one reads a negative, because I mean, as the name implies, it's a negative, right? So if you invert it in your head, you'll get the opposite colors and have an understanding of things. So clear would be black, okay? Magenta would be green. Cyan would be red, yellow would be blue, and blue would be yellow. It's just basic color theory. But you can get an understanding of good negative through this as well. Now, a bad negative, again, I've told you about clear negatives and how they mirror the rebate and how overexposure is better. But in this Fuji, you can see that it's nearly pure black over here. In fact, it is pure black. Absolutely no light is getting through those crystals over there. And that's what happens when things are heavily, heavily overexposed. The crystals develop so densely that light can't pass through them. And of course, if we invert that, what that means is that that's going to be pure white, which it is in the scan, unfortunately. I don't very often overexpose stuff to the extent where it can't be salvaged. In fact, I don't think I've managed to do that as of yet with Portra, but this Fuji stock over here and in this frame got very close to being too dense to have any light come through it. Anyway, what all this means is that if I pick my negatives up at the lab and I see a bunch of clear space in a frame, then I know it's underexposed and it's going to be quite tough to scan, and that if I do scan it, I'm going to have to be making up data. I mentioned that in the aquarium video. This particular frame and all of these are quite underexposed, so there's not a lot of data there for me to work with in the scan. Here's a self-portrait with the sharks. This one, in the scan, I ended up turning things quite red and magenta in the shadows, but that is because when you do that with a scan, it gives the illusion of something being there when there isn't actually anything, as you can see in the negative. All this clearness is just nothing. And you can use an understanding of negatives to make selects of things to print or scan. And of course, as I've said, in scanning, you can get away with a lot more than you can in printing. But if you're doing color darkroom stuff, you need a good negative to get a good print, because the light is being shone through the negative, and if there's no data in the negative, then there's going to be no data in the print. I can't show you the frames that are meant to go there. They're on a need-to-know basis. But again, looking at this Ektar, which has less exposure latitude than Portra, you'll see that this in the windows is overexposed because it's so dark that no light can get through. And towards the edges of this frame, actually, it's also quite bright. Definitely not non-salvageable, as you'll have seen in the scan, but essentially what you do when you're looking at a negative is invert it in your head and you'll have an idea of how things look. So long as you see something, you're going to have a picture. If you see pure black, you're going to have pure white, and if you see pure white or pure clear, then you're going to have pure black. There are other things that can impact colors in a photograph as well, such as light leaks. In this roll, I've got light leaks along the edges, and they're green. They show up as green on the negative, and what that means is in scanning, they're going to be inverted and turn red. That means that light passed through the back of the film or through the anti-curl layer and backing and the emulsions and came through from the wrong direction, which is why it has a red cast to it. If the leak were from the front, then it would be a pure white light leak, or maybe a bit blue. Interesting side note, I'm pretty sure Cinestill is coming out with a film that they accidentally had reverse spooled. So all the film's really going to do is be shot through the back of it, and everything's going to be red. It's like a red scale film, and I'm quite certain that it's as a result of bad spooling at some point. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed that, and that it provided some insights into the negative story and the way in which one can be calculated and careful about their interpretations of things. And hopefully maybe it'll help you make some better pictures going forward, and possibly more informed opinions on film stocks. But as I said in the beginning, this isn't scientific. I haven't done some elite level analysis of the color films to get an idea of the way they render things the way they do. This is just my personal interpretation and the steps that I take in those interpretations. I'll see you next week. I didn't mention in last week's video, but I have a new print run up with some really special, nice prints in them. And if you'd like to buy one, you're welcome to. This is my archive, by the way.